Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and Beyond. And our guest today is here to talk even more about the beyond part of science education and the importance of learning STEM outside of the classroom.
The greatest influence, especially before 8th grade, is really this experience you have out of school, you have with family. And we do a lot of work with scientists. When you ask them to talk about a magical moment, it's typically not in a classroom, although it might have actually happened in a classroom, but it's talking about the group they were with, the subject they were talking about, the experience like going out in nature and seeing something or seeing the night sky. So you find that out-of-school experience often is the driver for people's interest in science.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first, I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
Welcome back, everybody. It is a new school year. We're kicking off the new season. This is season number 13. And what I was thinking is we should get one of those, I think there's that number podcast, number files, because we could do something about, 13, like, ooh.
Oh, yeah, like because we're on season 13, everything's going to go wrong this year?
Well, don't jinx it. I never understood
How
that,
can we
though.
jinx it that way?
The thing is, though, that's only...
We're not superstitious.
We're not superstitious.
We're science teachers. And we're science teaching.
Well, okay, so then we could just look at the decisions that people made based on number superstition. Because I do believe 13 is only in certain areas of the world, and then in other countries, like, there's a completely different number.
Okay.
So we could have been jinxed in a different country for a previous season.
But they love us in other areas, so we're huge in Wyoming, I know.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
In any case, yes, we're back, and I know some of you are already teaching in the classroom, but we are going to talk a little bit about the beyond in science education, where science education has been happening. There's not necessarily a season for it. We don't start the school year in science centers like in museums and other places where science education is happening all the time.
And it's happening all the time in our students' minds or all learners' minds. I mean, ultimately, there shouldn't be that press pause, time when you take a break from school or learning. That science is part of your life all the time. So there's a good chance that all of those students out there have been doing some tinkering over the summer.
Science vacations.
Science museums that they went with parents and watching a lot of science shows or things like that. And so that's part of our lives. It was a part of my life growing up. And
absolutely.
Sounds like yours too, Brian. So, and that's really what we're going to focus on. And NSTA themselves have focused on that. And that was one of the results of that was a new name. NSTA has a brand new name. It is now the National Science Teaching Association.
Yeah, so that broadens not just science teachers in the classroom, but obviously science educators of all walks of life, whether they are in the classroom or outside of the classroom, doing informal science in science centers and museums and other places where we definitely know science learning is happening.
And our guest today has been doing informal and outside of the classroom science his entire career, and he is the new NSTA President, Dennis Schatz.
So I'm Dennis Schatz, currently the president of NSTA. My day job, I have two of them. One, I'm the senior advisor at the Pacific Science Center, where I've been for over 40 years. It's a public science museum. And I'm also the senior fellow at the Institute for Learning and Innovation, which is a out-of-school research think tank based in Oregon. I have a number of NSF grants, which I work on through that organization. But my career and my background is really around out-of-school STEM learning, and have been involved in that for many years. And as many people know, I'm the first out-of-school STEM educator to lead NSTA in its 75-year history. So I'm very excited about the new directions it's taking, the fact that out-of-school learning is becoming more prominent, not only at NSTA, but elsewhere.
Wow, you got a lot of things for us to talk about. I'm actually really curious about how do you do both positions? I know we've had a few NSTA presidents on the show, but NSTA president, that's not you're not doing that 24/7, right?
No, but they do expect 60% of your time during your presidential year. Of course, there's the president-elect, president, and retiring president, and there's less time on the other two positions, but it's pretty major, and most people take leave or, they go into a partial part-time work. So, yeah, in some ways you have to back off of your regular job.
Okay. Now, you started with NSTA. This isn't the only thing. You just don't hop in as president. I did some digging, and you wrote a Science and Children article for the journal. In 1985, Return of the Comet. That was the first thing I could find with your connection to NSTA.
I probably have been a member of NSTAs, I'd say from 1977, something like that.
Sure. I'm assuming that was Halleys Comet.
That was Halleys Comet, right? I actually wrote a children's book called The Return of the Comet. It was very popular and did an article for Science and Children. And more recently, of course, we had the solar eclipse that occurred in 2017.
Sure.
And did a number of articles for Science and Children. And a colleague and I wrote a book for NSTA, a middle school curriculum called Solar Science, and a children's book called When the Sun Goes Dark.
If we, I think about Halleys Comet because if we think about the out of the classroom science learning, that is, I grew up on a dairy farm, and that's a lot of science learning that I did, tinkering around with tools or, the biology things or stuff like that. And Halleys Comet, I have a distinct memory, mainly because there's a timestamp on it, of going up in our barn with the little telescope my parents got me and seeing that comet through the telescope for the first time that's ever used it. And I was just, I still can very vividly remember that awe moment at that time. And it wasn't in a classroom, and it was, it had a big impact on my life and probably still my whole career.
And that's certainly true. And matter of fact, the research that's been done by people like Robert Tye and colleagues shows that the greatest influence, especially before eighth grade, is really this experience you have out of school, you have with family. And we do a lot of work with scientists. When you ask them to talk about a magical moment, it's typically not in a classroom, although it might have actually happened in a classroom, but it's talking about the group they were with, the subject they were talking about, the experience like going out in nature and seeing something or seeing the night sky. So you find that out of school experience often is the driver for people's interest in science.
Sure.
So does that include going to science museums and other kinds of learning opportunities there?
Yes, very much so.
Do you think people think about, in terms of science education, particularly for the K-12 level, do they think about the outside of the classroom part enough?
I don't think so. I think to a large extent, of course, with standards and there's a lot of constraints to say, here's what has to happen in the classroom. So you spend a lot of time thinking that way. And to build bridges between in school and out of school, it's that takes more time, that's more effort. But I think the rewards certainly outweigh the effort. And as you may know, NSTA now has a new journal called Connected Science Learning that's been going for 3 years. That's all about connecting in-school and out-of-school STEM learning. And I think that whole arena and whole effort to do that is growing, and certainly with the name change of NSTA, and so it's looking to how it's going to be different, that's a key part of what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm. And you're the field editor of that journal.
I was the field editor.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't be field editor and be president at the same time. So
yeah.
During my president-elect year, we found a new field editor, Beth Murphy, who's from the neck of the woods. She lives in Minnesota. So I'm now field editor emeritus.
Okay. Talk a little bit more about the name change. How did that for NSTA? Because it certainly is speaking to what we're talking about here. And I love it because we're starting a new year and a new school year where, the students have arrived, and there's always that beginning of the year classroom experience of doing new things, setting new things. And now NSTA has done that with a new name change. Can you give us a little bit of history, how that got started? And
Yeah, at the board meeting, I'd say 2 years ago, maybe even a little bit more, there was a whole discussion about changing the website, updating the website. And the board was very adamant that NSTA needed to really look at its engagement strategy, really a digital engagement strategy, but I would say it's engagement strategy in general. And they hired a company that has been working for 2 years to really help NSTA reinvent. I can't say the company reinvented. NSTA is reinventing itself. So to look at serving the science educator better than it has in the past. And I really like to talk about educators of science. There's a lot of people that don't think of themselves as science educators or science teachers, but they teach science.
Yes.
And these include certainly elementary teachers in classrooms, but after school practitioners, people at science centers. So the idea with not just the name change, but the whole idea of reinventing NSTA in general was to look at how do we serve this broader audience that is both in school and out of school, thinks of themselves as a science teacher, but also those people who say I'm a teacher of science. And I think also to attract a younger audience than NSTA generally has, people who are used to living on their phones and their iPads, and how does our digital structure really appeal to those kinds of individuals?
You must have been sitting in some of those discussions going, well, yeah, I've been doing this my entire career, right?
Yeah, I would say that, it's a long process. For 75 years, your focus has really been on classrooms, teachers, students, to really get people who are heavily engaged, thinking differently and embracing that is a long process. And I appreciate that. I don't, we all get caught up in our routines. I've just been reading the new book from the National Research Council on how people learn. And it has a whole thing about habits and I can't remember the other word, but this whole idea that you build up habits, and when you want to start changing those habits, it takes time to work on them. It's like weight loss or getting, I'm going to exercise now, and you say that, but changing the way you do things is often a difficult process and time-consuming process.
So you should accept a little bit of time to transition this. So I suppose we're going to see some changes in NSTA coming this year. I think we're going to get a new logo and a new website. Is that correct? Is there anything else that we should be looking for?
Correct. Well, we have the new name, National Science Teaching Association, really focused on not a group of individuals, but really on how you convey science to people. Certainly a new website. I'm not sure how soon it'll be rolled out. I'd say by the first of the year for sure.
Okay.
A new way of interacting. We'll try and be more personalized. So as you go in and interact with the website, it will know a little bit more about you, so it can direct you to resources that might be most appropriate for you. Certainly a new logo. There's going to be a new membership structure where you can get a digital only. So if you don't really want your journal to be killing a lot of trees, you can get digital versions of your journals, and you can still get the hard copy if you want it. The big thing for me is there'll be a free membership. So somewhat like the New York Times, where you can get you can read a few articles, and as soon as you read a few articles that month, it says, oops, you've reached your limit. So it's a free membership that will give you some resources, but if you really want the full resources, you'll have to join as a member. So that's a number of the things that are going to happen. I think you'll see some of it will roll out at the conferences this fall, but we'll see more at the first of the year and certainly at next spring's conference in Boston.
That's intriguing to see a free membership, because one of the areas that I know we struggle with in our state organization is reaching out to elementary teachers who don't necessarily consider themselves teachers of science. And I think that obviously we know that that's the case. We want, and in many ways, they also have a lot more outreach to science centers where they might do that out of the classroom learning in science with field trips and whatnot there. So I could easily see some teachers being brought back into the fold in the elementary level, where they may need to have some resources and support beyond what's readily available in their school and district.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And there are other organizations that have done this. The National After School Association, which is the equivalent of NSTA, but for after school practitioners. they have the same kind of thing where you have an associate membership. And yeah, it's one way you get in, you get to know the person, and the goal is, of course, to ultimately encourage them to become a paying member.
Sure.
Well, and I think we know there's benefits for being a paying member beyond the journals, beyond the engagement. We know that there is advocacy, that we know that there is position statements as well. And just having a national presence of science education is important for everyone who learns science.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us more about, I saw a talk that you did about lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep, the importance of learning outside of the classroom. Particularly the life-deep caught my eye, life-wide. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, well, and you picked basically what my theme is. My theme, every president has to have a theme. And my theme is making science learning lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep. Lifelong is obvious throughout your lifetime. Life-wide is this really, it happens not only in school, but it happens at home, it happens in museums, at church, wherever, the idea that it happens everywhere. And life-deep is the idea, and we spend a lot of time on, wanting students to be ready, career ready, college ready. But life-deep really says people should embrace or engage with science at the level that's appropriate for them and of interest to them. So some people really have a STEM career or a STEM related career, but others may just find pleasure in even reading science fiction or science articles or going to IMAX movies that have a science theme. So that science deep is really this, you go as deep, if you want to look at this, but you go as deep into appreciating science as is appropriate for you.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've been listening to a podcast called Moonshot, and it traces the history of basically us getting to the moon 50 years ago. And one of the pieces that they reference is basically science fiction. Science fiction created the culture for us to accept that this was a possibility. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think there is a deep connection with science and science fiction and thinking about what we can do and what we might be doing to our planet. And we see some of the sci-fi apocalypse, etc., that kind of comes back to changing our thinking about what we see with global climate change, and what we can do with sustaining resources. And so I definitely think that that science deep piece is a key piece that I know helped shape my experience in science education and my interest in science fiction.
Because if there's been this research that's been done on where did people develop their interests, as I mentioned earlier, and a lot of it's out of school. A lot of it's around tinkering, going out in the environment, but I don't want to say an equal amount, but science fiction plays into an important part of what stimulated some people's interest in science.
Yeah, and I struggle with the career and college ready themes sometimes. While I understand the goal of that, I hate the idea of only associating what students are learning to like how to, a very utilitarian, I'm only, taking this in because I'm going to get X, Y, Z for a job. And, our schools are having some serious mental health discussions. And I think when our students are measuring like their self-worth and things like that, and if they're sitting here going, I like this particular subject matter, but I can't, see a career out of it, well, that's okay. Like, you can really be into frogs and have a love of the world and the life around you, and you don't have to directly apply it to a career.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. A big part of my theme and everything I talk about is how important it is to develop interest in science beyond either career or that they're going to go on and be a science major and that sort of thing. One of my saddest experiences in life is many years ago. I was out taking photographs, which is a passion of mine, with two people from our state office of superintendent. So that's our State Department of Education is called. One of them was the head of assessment, and we were at a diner having dinner, and there was a high school student serving us. And so the head of assessment was excited to understand, what grade she was in. Had she taken our state assessments? This was a number of years ago. She was a 10th grader when you had to pass the test. And so it was, how well did you do? And she did fine. And he said, well, how'd you do on the science test? And she said, I did fine. I'm just glad I never have to take science again.
Yeah.
And that's, it's kind of like, well, if what we do with all our work to make sure you're job ready and there is to eliminate that interest, we need to be both getting people ready and at the same time thinking about how do we build that interest. And I think the connections to out of school, a lot of people for the environment or the science fiction, a lot of things that aren't the hard science that you do in the classroom are ways to do that.
Well, I think of another out of school activity that you created, I believe, is PacSci-Doku. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, this was it was inspired actually by Scientific American that started doing a Sudoku.
Yeah.
But with replacing numbers by words, and it had a science-based question. It would give you a question, and then the answer was embedded within the 9x9 grid. And so I said, well, I can do that, and I started doing it for the Pacific Science Center. It comes up on our website once a month.
Sure. You're still doing them, right?
I'm still doing them. It's I think it's 12th year now. And I try and post them. I'm not really always good at posting them on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, but
So it's just like Sudoku, but it's letters.
It's letters, and you get a hint. The one that I don't think this is the most recent one, which was titled Antibacterial Guru, was can't remember this. Who inspired or who developed some of the first ideas about using antiseptics to kill germs and save people in surgery?
Lister,
right. So the answer was can't even remember his first name, about Lister and Listerine. So Listerine, the mouthwash, was actually invented or given its name after Professor Lister.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah.
See, Dale, you're learning science all the time.
Well, yeah, and then the next morning you'll think about it again in the bathroom for your morning routines.
Yeah.
Well,
how do you make them? Do you have like software that makes them, or?
Well, I get it. What I do is get a commercial Sudoku software that produces numbers, and I just replace the numbers with letters.
Oh, okay.
It's a real straightforward process. It's a 9-letter word, whatever it is. The most recent one was a new glue that is as strong as super glue, but if you put water on it, it actually dissolves and you can take it off. So it's super glue, but not, and it was called Strong But Weak Bond. It was the name of the puzzle. And it's based on snail slime. So the hint was all around snail slime, and the answer was snail slime.
Interesting. That one I didn't know. I'll keep my Lister in my pocket and have to do a little research on that one now.
Well, you have to go see the latest PacSci-Doku.
Okay.
Do you see that there's a market for some of these informal science? I mean, first of all, do you get people that do your PacSci-Doku that are not necessarily, what we would consider science educators?
A puzzle.
And then secondly, do you see a market for that growing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always done it mainly for fun and to serve the Pacific Science Center. So I can't say we've done any studies to say how many are really using it. We do know there's enough people, and I can't remember the numbers, who are going to it on the site to warrant it, to say this is worth doing. But what their backgrounds are, and whether they're science buffs or are they just puzzle buffs that, any puzzle they can find they're going to do, I don't know the answer to that. And we certainly see a lot of interest, a lot of people. We do know our market at the Science Center anyway. Mm-hmm. We certainly see lots of people who are not science, don't have a science-based career, who have an enthusiasm for science, and they're there to enjoy, whether it's from the kinds of things in the gift shop to the exhibits to our Bubble Festival to IMAX movies. So we know that there's a large portion of science-interested but not science-careered individuals that have an interest in science. So we just want it to be larger.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
In addition to my presidential theme, I have a presidential dream.
Yeah.
And that is someday science will be as pervasive as sports.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's the kind of image, if you think about wanting to get people who, I'm not a very active sports person. I walk a lot, but I watch what happens to the Mariners or to certainly to the University of Wisconsin football team, so on. So I'm an enthusiast in that way. So how do we get the same level of enthusiasm for science? When Discovery Channel can rate as high as ESPN, then I know we.
Oh yeah,
sure.
Actually, I have my running joke is that we know we've made it when you have to rush home for Monday Night Science.
Well, it's that
I'm thinking of what kind of chip situation do you do for Monday Night Science?
And I have a logo. There's a logo, and my sons did this for me. I have a logo. There's a website. There's a Facebook page called Monday Night Science.
That should be like a hashtag on Twitter, Monday Night Science.
Yeah. So yeah, it just hasn't. We haven't done that much with it, but. That's, but I've had people say, yeah, I really like to send something home on Monday to my students so that they get kind of a Monday Night Science activity, whether it happens on Monday. Monday Night Science is really the image.
Sure.
I hope it doesn't only happen on Monday. What you want it to do is to happen all the time.
Well, we do have some of this in a sense. I mean, certainly there's a lot of science-related television shows. You mentioned the Discovery Channel. There's a lot of those kinds of builds and experiment kind of things. And then if I think about some of the most popular shows are in ratings wise are all those crime shows, and they not always do a great job, but they dance around STEM things.
Right, that's true, and certainly Big Bang Theory.
Yeah,
and Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
very popular. Yeah. So I think, in fact, I just wrote an article which will come out in the Association of Science Technology Centers Dimensions Journal, talking about Monday Night Science, and it mentions a whole list of these because, it's not that it's not there. There's all these after-school competitions. There's science cafes. Yeah. Science festivals are all over the country now. Wisconsin has a huge science festival.
Yes.
It's just, it comes back to it's still a relatively small subset of individuals.
Well, it kind of depends. We see a huge growth in maker spaces and informal and in informal settings that I would argue, of course, is an outreach piece there in science. And whether that is not, whether that is happening with a science teacher in mind or not, there's definitely principles of science operating.
Absolutely. Maker spaces. And it operates, I remember going to a maker space where people were showing lace making. Talk about scientific knowledge or thinking. As much knowledge, but it's saying maybe mathematical thinking especially needed for lace making. So I think a lot of it's happening. It's just how do we, and some of it comes back to, if I think about sports again, a lot of it relates to the fact that the parents are very involved in sports one way or the other, both what they do personally and what they watch, what they go see. And if we could get parents a lot more, there's too many parents who say, I'm not very good at science. It's like mathematics too. So how do we get people more feeling like, oh, science is really cool? Yeah. We don't talk about the Mariners at the dinner table, but we talk about the latest image of a black hole that was seen.
Well, we see a lot of citizen science opportunities as well. That's been a huge growth in the last few years, and definitely ways for people to participate in the outdoors and indoors and, again, outside of the classroom.
Right. And I'm not always thinking of it being competitive. I just use sports as a metaphor for how pervasive you'd like to make it. And, music is another one. Music, if you think about other things in society that just music is huge. So how do we, get people talking at the dinner table about science topics and so on? And that's really, my goal, and I think all these things add to it. The competitions. I think at first robotics and even NSTA competitions.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So on are really great and they're competitive. But I'm not actually a big competitive person. They're really competitive sports.
We used to have a colleague in our department that would talk about the purpose of science is to win, but that was
he meant it tongue in cheek though.
He meant it tongue in cheek, and it was talking mostly about Science Olympiad. But
we had Science Olympiad, and apparently some of the teams were really intense from some of the other schools, so they actually made T-shirts one of the following years, and they put the purpose of science is to win as sort of an editorial on let's remember why we're here.
Yeah. But in any case, we could talk about all these connections. I think we definitely have a lot to look forward to this year. I'm going to be renewing my journal subscription or my NSTA subscription shortly, and I'm going to be thinking about changing over to Connected Science Learning and seeing what's there.
Oh. Okay. Well, right now, Connected Science Learning is free.
Oh, yeah.
So if you go to csl.org csl.nsta.org, or just Google Connected Science Learning, that'll be the first thing that comes up, and you can actually subscribe to it. And subscribing means you get an alert. It says the new issue is out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've talked a lot about some of the new changes that are coming to NSTA, what we have to look forward to. Is there anything before we let you go, Dennis, that you want to kind of talk about and leave with our listeners?
Well, certainly I have to put a plug in for what I hope is that many of them will think about coming to our regional conferences in Salt Lake City, Cincinnati, and Seattle, and then to the national conference in Boston, where they will see a lot of these changes that are coming out of NSTA. So that's probably the thing I'd like to say the most to end the program.
Well, fantastic.
All right. Thanks much, Dennis.
Thank you so much for your time, and good luck with the year of your presidency.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.